Welcome to this video, guys, which features the fantastic British trumpet player Sid Gauld. Sid has played with many amazing musicians, including Blur, The Stranglers, The Cure, George Michael, Sting, Sinead O'Connor, Tom Jones. He's the trumpet player at this time with Incognito. He's also played with Shack Attack and the Brand New Heavies. And his jazz credentials include Loose Tubes, Django Bates, Stan Tracy, the John Dankworth Band, Colin Townes Orchestra, and also the Lawrence Cottle Big Band. Okay, with no further ado, here we go with the interview with Sid Gauld. Okay, Sid, thanks for joining us today. Fantastic to have you as a guest on Tips from the Top. So, first question is, what made you want to play your instrument? What made you choose the trumpet?
Great question. Well, it was a bit of an accident, really. My family, I grew up in Scotland, in Dundee, and I wasn't interested in music at all as a very young child. And my dad had things like accordions and he had a keyboard, and the music that was around me, I didn't really like. And then one day at primary school, somebody said, does anybody want to play the trumpet? And just a bunch of 3 or 4 friends of mine, we all just stuck our hands up. And then we went and had this couple of trumpet lessons, from this very old guy who turned out to be the conductor of the local brass band. Oh. And he was very old. His name was David Fairweather, and he ran this band called St. Margaret's. And he was an amazing old guy. But I mean, I was about 9 or 10, and he already looked ancient. And he had a thing called a disease called rickets, where your legs splay out. Oh, yeah. Through not having enough calcium. So he looked quite an unusual character. And for us little kids, if you like, we thought, who's this guy? And he got his cornet out, got a trumpet out, took his false teeth out, and played a top C. and I was hooked. It was just such an amazing old guy with a warm kind of thing, and the 3 or 4 lads that we just went, oh, this is fun, So instead of playing football or just hanging about, we started playing trumpet as kids,
Very good. Fantastic.
So that's a bit of an accident, really. Bit of an accident more than anything else.
So, I mean, I know some of the answers to these questions because I've been lucky enough to know you and work with you on many occasions. But for those that don't, where did you study? Or what would you say was the most beneficial area of your study, I should say?
Very good question, yeah. Well, I started off obviously playing in brass bands, and then I played in orchestras and stuff. So I wasn't doing I hadn't played in a big band. I wasn't doing any kind of jazz. But my father played keyboard, and he used to do, almost reluctantly, he would do a few gigs because he played with a good feel. But he just busked and played along popular tunes, Yeah. And in Scotland, things like Hogmanay, he'd always be the guy playing, and he'd be like the life and soul of the party, playing tunes and stuff. So sometimes I'd busk with him.
Right.
So that was my only jazz kind of quasi jazz approach, if you like. But then I didn't go to college. I joined the army. I was in the Scots Guards. So I came from Scotland, came down to England, and I went to a place called Nella Hall for a year, which was like a music college. And then I joined the band. Okay. And it was kind of around that point that I started being introduced to sort of big band and stuff, because there wasn't, when I grew up, there wasn't any locally to me. But in terms of where I kind of main area of study, when I left the army, most of the time I wasn't in the army for very long, relatively speaking. I did about 4.5 years, I guess, in total with the training. But when I left, my first job as a professional player, if you like, was on a cruise ship. Oh. And they advertised for a trumpet for a jazz quartet. And this is a bit of a side story, but basically I turned up for this audition, and there was 3 or 4 trumpet players there, and the other guys could clearly play jazz, and I was a bit of a busker. I probably had a half decent ear, but I didn't know any tunes. I didn't know anything about jazz really. But the MD handed out a load of music that was in concert, and it was for vibraphone. He had a vibe quintet. He didn't have any trumpet music, and the MD handed out this music that was in treble and bass clef. So I was the only one who could read it and transpose it because I played in orchestras. So I got the gig instead of the guy who could play jazz. So it was, again, complete fluke, Right. And anyway, so I went on this cruise ship, and basically the cruise ship, we flew to New York, and it was going in and out of New York. Oh. And I ended up doing in total, I did about 8 months on this ship. And the thing is that the piano player and the drummer in particular were fantastic jazz musicians. There was a piano player called David Shaw, and the drummer was called John Heyman, and they were really helpful. And for the first couple of months, there was a saxophone called Mike Moore, and we were lucky. We could just play whatever we wanted a lot of the time in the evening. Wow. They would just say, can you play for a couple of hours? And we would just play jazz.
Right.
So it was it was a bit like, for me, it was like being at college, you know.
Yeah.
And they would roast me and they'd laugh at me and all the rest of it. But we were all mates. So they'd say, we're going to play Green Dolphin Street and we're going to play Stella, you know. And then, you know, we bought real books and I just, every day I got to kind of have a go at playing these tunes with these guys, you know.
Very good.
They were very helpful, yeah. So that was my, you know, main kind of massive learning curve, if you like.
Yeah. So, I mean, being in New York, I don't know whether you got any chance to go ashore and listen to the great players there, but that leads nicely on to my next question, which is, who was your first major jazz inspiration?
Interesting. Well, I had a few, as a kid, if you like, playing in brass bands and orchestras and stuff, people would give you records, you know. Obviously, it's a long time ago, so it was tended to be like vinyl records. And I had a couple of things. I had a Harry James, there was a tune, Strictly Instrumental, that I kind of tried to take down just by ear. And then I had a Red Nichols album, Hot Pennies. So there was a couple of tunes like Thing of the Saints and a few things that I just tried to play along with.
And
so
how old was you for this?
Oh, I would have been 10 or 11 or something, 11 or 12. But I mean, we'd put the record on and I just have a go at playing along. I didn't know what I was doing really. I just copied it by ear completely, you know.
I did a very similar thing with a Kenny Baker record. Well, tried to play along with Kenny Baker, but about the same age as well. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. And it was just, it's that thing of just playing along with records is a really useful thing, I think. But there's 2 or 3 albums that sort of hit me. And I kind of thought, wow, you know. And one of them was while I was in the army, I bought Wynton Marsalis's first album, the very first one. I mean, I had a few other albums. I had a really nice Art Farmer album. I had a Freddie Hubbard. The Art Farmer one is called From Vienna with Art. And it's sometimes called The Eloquent Art Farmer, I think. It's a reissue. But and then there was another one, Freddie Hubbard one, Skagley, I think it's called. Quite a funky thing. And I just loved the playing on it, you know.
Was the winter one called Think of One?
No, it was before that. It was his very first album. It was just called Wynton Marsalis. And it had Miles Davis's old rhythm section on for half the tracks. So Ron Carter, Herbie Hancock, and Tony Williams, is it? And then he also had Kenny Kirkland and Branford is on it. And so it's like half the album is done with the guys that went on to play with Wynton. And I think the other half was some of Miles's original quintet. But so I bought this album, got it home, listened to it. And I just thought, what an amazing, I had never heard of this guy. I just thought, what amazing player and everything. And then I looked at the cover and realized he was about the same age as me. So it was, you know, when you're young, when you're about 19 or 20 or whatever. And I was kind of like, wow, it's a reality check, you know. Yeah. Because I kind of thought, how can, you know, just hadn't heard somebody playing that way before, you know.
And
then I went to Ronnie.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, then I went to Ronnie Scott's for the first time.
Right.
And saw Louis Belson band with Bobby Shue.
Oh, wow.
And Bill Berry playing. And this was all round about the same 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
So it was kind of like my ears were sort of open to these. I'd never heard anybody play like Bobby Shue. No. And I hadn't had anybody play like Wynton, you know.
Yeah.
So
it's quite extremes as well in some ways. I mean, with Bobby.
Yeah, I didn't have any jazz references. I couldn't, if you said to me, who do you like listening to and all the rest of it? I'd heard the Harry James thing, which I thought was great, obviously.
Yeah.
And I'd heard a couple of Miles Davis tracks. I think Green Dolphin Street and Stella. I'd heard a couple of things, you know, but I didn't have a massive jazz collection or anything. And suddenly it was like, wow, you know, I'm gonna better buy a few records.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So it stuck with me. That album stuck with me in particular because I think there's you know, I'm a big Wynton fan, and I think some of those compositions are really interesting as well. You know,
I think one of my first albums was a Wynton one. it's incredible.
Right.
Actually, talking it wasn't really his album though. It was released under him, but it was with Art Blakey, and it was
Oh
called
yes,
An American Hero, and it was a double album where he does My Funny Valentine and
I,
ETA and all that.
I know that album. Yeah, I know those
Yeah.
tracks.
So that was
Yeah, blistering player, and
yeah.
you're very young. A little story that some of you guys watching might be interested. I work with a sound engineer, a really amazing sound engineer called Chris Lewis. There's a band I play with, and he's the sound engineer. And all the time that Art Blakey and Louis Belson and those bands we're talking about, Chris was the sound engineer at Ronnie Scott's.
Wow. Okay.
He said that when Art Blakey's bands were there for the week, he'd go in to kind of almost open the club up and set the mics up and get ready. And there'd be a horn player in each corner of the room practicing already.
Wow.
He said they do that kind of all afternoon, and then they do the gig. He just said they were like, non-stop committed. Yeah, shedding.
Wow, fantastic. Well, that again, that really leads on nicely to the next question, which is, what is your approach to improvising jazz, and what would you suggest to like a good intermediate player or maybe a comeback player? What would you suggest to them to how to approach jazz if they're new to it?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Don. I think teaching jazz and learning jazz can be quite elusive sort of thing for some people. It kind of seems like it should be straightforward, but then some people find it tricky to get an in, if you like, find a way of approaching it. So I think sometimes try different ways of approaching it. You could just listen to a lot of music, play along like I did as a kid, a little bit. You're just playing along to things, and as soon as you hear something that you think, oh, I might be able to play that because it's not too complicated. Yeah. But I like, little lick or a riff, and get your ears going that way. That's one approach immediately. The other thing is just getting 3 or 4 tunes, like classic tunes. Take the A Train or Satin Doll or something. A tune that you can play the melody reasonably easily, and get that thing of trying to play maybe on 2 and 4. So that you've got that feeling of a sort of jazz feel. Yeah. Sometimes hard to do metronomes when you put a metronome on, you start playing, you can't hear it. So sometimes using an earpiece, one ear in or something, and get the idea of playing some tunes in a jazzy way, if you like.
Yeah,
that's maybe perhaps more for a beginner kind of player. Somebody who just gets it. Trying to match up playing with good rhythm, as well as understanding a bit about harmony. I think a lot of students, I've done a bit of teaching, and the classic thing is people try and play too much.
Yeah.
They look at a tune and they're trying to play all the changes, and they're not paying enough attention to the rhythm and space sort of thing. Trying to leave,
it's that
matching up what they do.
Meandering eighth notes.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. Trying to do less of that. Just think of the rhythm,
Yeah.
Things like Charleston rhythm's a good one, long and short, and play around with the rhythm a bit.
Fantastic.
That's a good. Sometimes you buy books where they've got lots of licks and riffs and stuff, and people trying to play maybe one lick but changing the rhythm of it might be quite a good approach.
Yeah. Sounds great. Okay, that's very helpful. What do you think about when you're improvising? I suppose it depends on the tune, but have you got the chords going through? Are you just shutting that off and just hoping to hear things, or are you not thinking at all?
Combination of all of those. I think. Right. I think so, going back to what we talked about before we actually, when we first introduced each other, some of the tunes that I've sat down on piano and just played, say, root and 7 in the left hand, and then tried to play, say, the extensions or the third and stuff in the right hand, like a triad, 3 or 4 notes in the right hand, 2 in the left hand. And I've sat and just almost like a ranger's piano, plonked my way through a tune, trying to learn the changes. I find doing that makes me internalize the changes of a tune.
And you do that in the trumpet key?
I do that in the trumpet key, exactly. So I'll get, say, a B flat real book, and I'll get the tune. And quite typically, I'll have a look at the form of the tune. This is something I try and do. So if it's an AABA, you're really only learning an A and a B and just checking the cadences at the end. So it doesn't have to take as long as some people might think it does. But then I find that is, whenever I've done that with the tune, then I can almost kind of just see the chords as I'm playing it. But I haven't done that with most tunes. I've only done that with I guess, relatively small amount of tunes. So when I'm on a gig, I'm quite often I'm just kind of hearing where I'm going, So more of a.
So just a sort of like an offshoot of question that, let me ask you this then. So do you feel you improvise better on the tunes that you've learnt and internalized on the piano? Do you feel more
Yes.
comfortable? So
Yes,
it's
definitely.
really important. It's very important then to internalize the changes. Really, I think.
Yes, because I don't imagine going on a quartet gig or a quintet gig with a piano player and the bass player are. I mean, I guess people who really, very accomplished bass players and piano players, they just know where they're going almost in a subconscious way, but it's because they've learnt so many tunes.
Yeah.
So they kind of know. Because I've talked to a couple of bass players about this, because I have a little go at playing double bass. I'm not particularly good, but I have a go at it, But the same thing, I'm not very good at remembering the changes. I think it's a trumpet player's thing, or just brass players thing generally, But definitely, if you can sit down and I find I learn the changes more by sitting down at the piano than I do trying to do it on trumpet,
Yeah, that's great advice. So, I mean, I read somewhere that Monk would always spend about an hour just working his way through the changes, and then also like Bill Evans, there's a reason why he recorded some of his tunes so many times, because he's like, well, I'm getting better at them, That's
right, yeah,
so.
yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
brilliant. I think that would be very helpful as well for people listening. So, who do you enjoy listening to and why?
Well, I listen to a lot of different styles of music. I still listen to a lot of Latin music.
Okay.
So there's certain players like Perico Ortiz. I still come back and listen to him. You wouldn't necessarily say he was a jazz musician, but a fantastic trumpet player. But people like Bobby Shue that I mentioned, people like Winton, Tom Harrell, Kenny Wheeler. I like listening to. They play with beautiful sounds. They've got amazing sounds and fluent approach. And I guess I veer towards that.
Okay. So sound is more your thing. The sound is very important.
Well, sound and feel, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, also, I've listened in the past to slightly more in the past to people like Clifford and Lee Morgan and and Miles, obviously.
Yeah.
But all amazing. But I guess quite often in the car on the way to a gig, I'll stick on Spotify. I'll stick on Tom Harrell or Kenny Wheeler or Bobby Shue.
So how important would you? Another little offshoot question that how important would you say it is to listen to jazz to become a good jazz improviser?
Well, when your first question, I mean, one of your first questions about advice to comeback players or intermediate players. I mean, that's one of the just listening to loads and loads of jazz is probably step one, I think. And then the other thing is this is a slight offshoot sort of thing. If you're a comeback player, or even if you're a busy player and you just want to play the trumpet well, it's so hard to fit all the different things in it you should really practice,
Yeah.
If you haven't got hours and hours a day to do it all, if you're a professional, I suppose you should have that amount of time. But if you're busy working, then sometimes you can't fit that in. So if you were, say, a lead trumpet player who decided they wanted to get better at improvising, then sometimes it's hard to fit all that in. So trying to time manage and trying to practice things that you would practice normally on the trumpet, but from a jazz approach. So I've had a few students where I've tried to say, look, instead of just playing scales and arpeggios, do it with, say, a metronome on 2 and 4, or change the scales so that they're more jazz. Instead of playing major scales, once you've learnt them, play, diminished scales and altered scales, and try and get your ears open to. So you're still trying to play the trumpet well, but you're adding a jazz study thing to it.
Ingredients that are going to make you a better jazz player, if you like.
Yeah, and if you're somebody who's really good lead player or something, then practice over your whole range, but do it, playing jazz instead of just playing arpeggios. You can play all the different jazz chords,
So next question would be, who would you most like to play with, or would you have most liked to play with out of all of the history, if you like? What would have been your dream gig, if you like?
Well, dream gig, it's a tricky one. this is a slightly personal thing. I says sometimes you have players that you just think are amazing, you know, and then this is more of a kind of celebrity pop thing as well as the jazz thing, and then unfortunately you meet them and you realize that they're not so nice after all, you know. I've had that with a couple of really kind of well-known players, and I kind of thought, oh, it might not have been so nice to work with, you know. But I met Arturo once, who was really friendly. I happened to get in I was doing a festival in Indonesia called Java Jazz, which is a huge festival. You have loads of stages, big stages, and Arturo was on, and there's loads of traffic. So I got on the bus. There's like shuttle buses going from the hotel to thing, and Arturo got on.
Oh.
So it was lovely to sit in. He was really open and he was friendly and he chatted. And I said to him, I'm on the way to see your gig, Arturo, you know. He's going to go watch. So he was funny. So it would be, I guess, nice to play with him. Yeah. I played at a festival once in Vitoria in Spain, where we were on tour and we played, and then the next day we had a day off, and a few of us went off to Pamplona to see the running of the bulls. And Wynton Marsalis got up in the hotel that night, did a jam session.
Oh wow!
So if I'd stayed in the hotel, I could have maybe got up and played with him, you know.
Oh, that would have been cool.
That would have probably been a bit of a roasting, because he had a big band with him, and the trumpet section was phenomenal, you know.
Right.
We got to watch next day. We watched them rehearse in the afternoon. They were rehearsing in the hotel. And they said, just come in, and as long as you're quiet, you can watch the rehearsal, you know.
Yeah.
So we were. So that I think Wynton probably.
Okay. What exciting, or what projects are you currently involved in?
Well, I'm a few different things. I'm still for quite a few years. I've been with Incognito.
Okay.
Jazz funk group. That's been, you know, I think it's in its 42nd year. That band. It's been going a long time, and I've been doing it since about 2005, 2004, 2005. But obviously, with all the thing that's been happening with COVID, and even to an extent Brexit, there's been a bit of a hiatus, but we're back working quite a bit. We did Glastonbury last week.
Very good.
And then we just been to Spain a few days ago, and we're going to Italy on Friday for a week.
Oh.
And then we're going to America for a month in September. So there's quite a few things coming up. And that's more of a horn section thing. It's 3 brass.
Okay.
And there's a lot to play. And there's a couple of solos for trumpet, but it's not as necessarily full on jazz improvising gig, you know. It's more of a section thing. I'm doing that. I've got quite a few gigs with Roberto Pla coming up.
Okay.
And that'll be a mixture of maybe a couple of brass, 2 or 3 brass, and then the big band. So he's got various different lineups. And Snowboy in the Latin section is another band that I've been doing for quite a few years. Okay. He has quite a few gigs coming up. And then I've started playing with a band called Kong Fusion, which is a kind of a funk fusion band. We did a gig, we did a festival. So yeah, a few different things like that, really.
Fantastic.
Summer's looking not too bad, you know.
What would you say is your biggest musical achievement?
Oh, that's a good one. I've got try to think. I've done lots of different. It feels like a bit of a name drop thing, but I've done quite a few different gigs.
Yeah.
And sometimes you come away from a gig that most people would think is not necessarily a big gig or that important. But if you've played really well, you come away thinking, great, you know.
Yeah.
And I often just gauge it on how I've played and how I've felt, you know, as well as the band and everything. Because sometimes you might play great, but it might not be a great gig. You have these two things, you know, the balance thing. But as long as you're thinking, well, I couldn't have played any about that. But we a few years ago, we did a gig again at Java Jazz, but it was a different year from the Arturo one, where we played with Incognito and we backed Shaka Khan.
Oh.
And we had to play all the we had to try and play all her tunes, and the brass players, we had to arrange some of the music, try and play the Jerry Hay arrangements.
Wow.
So just getting through that gig, I was kind of quite pleased to have got to the end of it, because it was a very heavy blow, you know. Yeah. And we had a good night. So that was a good one, you know.
Okay.
And then there's been a few other gigs where you kind of, you know, trying to think, we did a gig once with Ray Charles. Okay. Underneath the Louvre with a big band, and that was, you know, wouldn't sure if I'd call it achievement. It's just moments, if you like, musical moments where you think, oh, that was amazing, you know.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So what would your advice be then to just for someone wanting to get better at jazz? What would be your number one thing to say to do?
Well, I think people, if it's a British player, they often come from a particular background, and that is often the British system is, for whatever reason, not a criticism, but it's geared towards more classical approach, brass band, wind bands, orchestras. So most people, it's a rhythmical thing that they probably need to work on. And then obviously understanding harmony. Those two things are the big things that I think people find tricky. So I think getting an understanding of jazz harmony, because it can feel like a foreign language. The simple exercises. There's one I was going to suggest, which is playing turnarounds, 4 bars, and you do it in all keys. Where you play the first bar is, for instance, in the key of C, D minor. Second bar G7, third bar C7, C major 7, and then the fourth bar A7, not A minor. And the A7 is like a 5-1 back to D minor. And just going around that, I've given this to students, and most of the time they struggle a bit with it. But if they stick with it, and you try not to play too much, and put a metronome on 2 and 4, so you're going D minor, G, C, A, and then just trying to. Each time you go around, try and play slightly more each time. Either play the arpeggios, play the thirds, play the sevenths, and then start trying to link up those things. That simple as that sounds, that is quite a good way of kind of unlocking the idea of rhythmically playing along with something.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have spent their life being conducted, or they spent their life playing in a band where somebody counts them in and there's a drummer playing or something. That thing of having your own self-sufficient time.
Yeah.
And then the freedom that you're actually playing whatever you want, whenever you want, improvising. That could be a good way of getting started, you know.
Thinking about it like that, that's quite overwhelming, isn't it, really? If you think about someone getting into it for the first time, Wow. I've never really thought of it.
It's quite a lot to go straight in, but if you can get people to do it playing as little as possible, even if they're only playing a couple of notes, but gradually they gain the confidence to feel where it is on the beat and what they're playing, you know.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it's been great to chat to you and get your valuable insights. Thanks very much. I think a lot of people are going to get some great value from this, which is the whole idea. And so I'm going to sign off and say thanks very much.
Yeah, great, Darren. Yeah.
Okay, and hope to see you soon. I'll come to one of your gigs.
Yeah.
Okay, Sid.
Great,
thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Okay guys, that's all for now. Please remember to like the video if you've enjoyed it and got some value from it. Also remember to subscribe. We've got some other great guests lined up for the Tips from the Top series. Also check out the Arturo Sandoval interview, which is just above my head somewhere now. Have a click on that. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.